Hi everyone, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, which is going to focus on how we can comply, accelerate, and benefit with disclosure management. A few words about myself. I'm your presenter today. My name is Milena Paunova, and I specialize in three key SAP products within the EPM area: disclosure management, business planning and consolidation, and PCM. The target audience of the webinar we'll explore in a second, but let's have a look at the agenda. So we'll have a look at SAP DM, an overview of SAP DM, use cases, and why it's going to be beneficial for our business. We'll look at periods and reports concept in SAP DM. Then we'll move on to investigate and see what data cache and formatting means in disclosure management world. We'll also focus on the security features and the audit features that disclosure management provides. We'll also have a look at XBRL and iXBRL preparation for submissions to tax authorities. And towards the end of this webinar, we'll have a live navigation through the system. During the webinar, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat at the webinar window. And once we are finished with the navigation through the system, I will be going through these questions and providing answers to all of you. So, target audience. Well, finance, of course, because the finance team are the ones that are responsible for preparation of the financial statements, controlling, audit, sales, sales in the perspective of if you haven't really, don't have any knowledge about SAP DM, then maybe you can see that this is going to be beneficial for either your clients or for your department. EPM clients, of course, if you are using already EPM products, it makes perfect sense to explore and expand your portfolio further with SAP Disclosure Management, but also because SAP Disclosure Management is such a powerful product, it can be used even if you don't have SAP landscape. So, SAP DM overview. Disclosure management can be used in various use cases. The most common use case is to produce the annual report of your company, and usually this splits into two parts, front half and back half. Why is that? We usually, in most companies, in multinational organizations, there are two teams that share this job. So one team produces the front half of the annual report and another team produces the back half of the report, which are then joined together to come up with the annual report which gets published on your websites. It can, SAP DM can be used for both, or you may decide that you only need to prepare the back half. Back half, usually what is covered there is the primaries to your financial statements as well as notes to the accounts. A beneficial option for you to do both would be that you have consistency across your annual report, and you wouldn't have to invest effort to bring these two together so that they are under the same format, layout, etc. Another use case for disclosure management is preparation of iXBRL and XBRL reports, which we'll look into later in the webinar. These are for submission to tax authorities, and here I have named a few. So the benefit would be that all your financial data is in one place, and also you prepare your XBRL reports in disclosure management. Everything in one hat. Another quite typical use case is half-year and quarterly reporting. Companies use disclosure management for that as well, as it is very user-friendly, and you have all the information that you need there, so you can check your reporting and prepare it on this basis. Apart from preparation of the annual report, a consolidated company which gets published on either the stock exchange or on your website, you can use disclosure management for your local entity statutory accounts preparation. This falls in line with iXBRL submissions as well. So imagine that you could be producing, if you have, let's say, 100 entities, all these 100 reports could be coming out of disclosure management. And we have seen cases where disclosure management was used to produce the management board report or the management report pack, either on a monthly basis or again on a quarterly basis. Some highlights about DM. If you're using disclosure management, you can benefit from up to 40% faster financial statement generation. You can also save time because it's very tricky when you have rounding errors towards the end of the preparation, the end cycle of the preparation, where this can be time consuming. SAP Disclosure Management has a feature to help you with that. Because your team is producing the financial statements much faster, they have much more time to focus on more strategic activities. Another benefit is that you have 100% ownership of your data and user adoption as well. Another benefit is that the financial close as well is much faster. What do we mean by that? Well, all your data is in one place, as I said already, but also for any last-minute changes, as your data is dynamically connected to your underlying data sources, you can update this at a touch of a button, and you can see how this can accelerate your financial close. Let's have a look of what is under the hood of disclosure management. So our initial starting point is our data sources, where our data is coming from. This can be ERP software, it could be Excel spreadsheets, you can connect disclosure management to your BW system or your HANA database. If you are using the EPM portfolio products, and here you can see we're naming BPC and FC consolidation system, you can connect it directly to your SQL server, and these are multiple ways of how you can generate data, and it's not one or the other. You could be having a case scenario where your data is coming from multiple data sources, so the idea would be to consolidate all of these data in disclosure management. The reason that you see disclosure management here as a data source in its own right is because the data is passed on to disclosure management and it's stored there. So disclosure management is also a data source for your data, connected to your underlying data sources. So once we have our data connections established, we can pull all of these data into disclosure management and start preparing the annual reports. What we have is a data repository or a data cache. Usually this is in the form of spreadsheet, so your data will be arriving in spreadsheet format, workbook, but it's not just an offline workbook. This is a dynamic workbook which is on the server, it's connected to disclosure management, and you can dynamically update the data that you have based on which year of account you're reporting against. So in the data repository, you pull the data that you have. You might need to do some manual adjustments or to add additional calculations which are not available in your underlying data source, and this is something that you do under the data cache or the data repository. This is a place where you will be checking your numbers, and you can decide even to apply formatting of your statements to comply with your corporate layout. Then the next step would be to pull these data that you have just created in your data cache into a Word format, because this is the standard, isn't it? We produce our annual reports in Word documents. We have tables of data, numbers, and narrative. The narrative can be entered in against the data cache itself, or it can be included in the Word document. You can decide to produce a PowerPoint slide with the information that you've got, which is also an option, and you can do that in disclosure management. And then the final step is producing the output of disclosure management. You have finished with your reporting and you want to communicate it to the corresponding controllers, auditors, or to the tax authorities, or even to the publishers, because most companies are working with publishers and they provide the files to them. So this is where the output processor comes along. All these three major steps that we are looking at are controlled by a workflow. This workflow can be custom-made, or it can be used as out of the box. It is up to you, but we can have several levels of approval steps and rejection steps, and you will see that later on in the webinar. Another great feature about disclosure management is that this workflow can be controlled via Fiori app. So you are responsible of the preparation of and review of the financial statements. So you are the approver in that perspective. So you can view via your mobile device at what stage the reports are and whether you want to approve them or reject them, and other commentary, which makes it even more user-friendly. We mentioned the output processor, so once you have finished, you can decide what format you want to output, and this output is generated automatically of the system of disclosure management. So you can see we have quite a few outputs available there. Some benefits of disclosure management. Well, we can see in disclosure management that all our data can be in one hat, which is something that I mentioned. So all your data sources can be brought into one place. We have an approval process tied to the workflow. We are complying with regulatory and reporting standards. We can also use disclosure management for our tagging to be able to generate iXBRL reports for tax submissions. Another great thing is that any change that you do in disclosure management is being tracked. So at any point in time, you can check revisions which the document you have created has. So what has changed between the previous version and the current version, who has changed it, and when it was changed. We have very sophisticated workflow, and as I said, you can custom make a workflow based on your needs. You can tie this to security so that only certain users with certain roles have the ability to perform steps in the workflow itself. Another great benefit is that you can use single sign-on to disclosure management, which can be helpful with your security policies at your company, and makes things much easier. Rounding errors, you can do this at the touch of a button once you have designed your rounding tables in disclosure management. So rounding can be omitted, and it's not going to be a worry for you anymore. Disclosure management also provides you with some business content which complies with different reporting standards, and as you can see, IFRS, UK GAAP, Solvency II, based on what industry you are working against, and also what is your compliance requirement. Last mile financial reporting, that's what disclosure management is mainly used for. We can have we are looking at a screenshot from the system, so everything is created in a hierarchical view. So you see that you have all your reports and primaries at the top, and then the notes underneath. So every single chapter, these are chapters, would hold an information. Each chapter is something that you edit in independently, so multiple people can work at the same time on their assigned chapter, which is great. Also, you can link different chapters. So, for example, data that is available in one of your notes should be mentioned somewhere else, so you can establish connections between the different chapters. You can add, of course, some pie charts or bar charts or any graphic representation of your financial data, and this will be included in your Word report. So based on your requirements and the teams responsible for your annual report preparation, you can actually design from start to end your annual report and make it ready for publishing on the website. You have noticed here that there are some different icons. These are related to the workflow and they show the status of your chapter. So is your chapter still work in progress? Has it finished? So at any point in time, a reviewer can open the web portal of disclosure management and see what's the progress of your work. Some features or additional features that disclosure management has, the various data sources. Again, I would like to specify that disclosure management can be used with SAP and non-SAP data sources. We can link these multiple data sources into our disclosure management system, so we can consolidate all of our information in a way, so everything is in one place. DM supports different outputs of the system. It also has a feature which is actually effectively a plugin, which helps us with our COREP and FinRep reporting taxonomies, again for submissions to the tax authorities. You can tie the workflow steps in the disclosure management to your email, so you can set it up to receive notification. For example, if someone has rejected your work because something is missing, you can receive an email notification, go into the system and address the issue straight away. You have a formatting capability, so there are two options of formatting that you can use, and again this will be based on your preference, but you can design everything so that it fits with the corporate layout or the design that you have decided to use for that particular year. Next year you can change the formatting and apply it again. Fiori app we mentioned as well for workflow approval. Roll forward. Roll forward is not the roll forward in accounting terms, but it is more whatever you design as first off when you start with your implementation, it's reusable as content. All the links to your underlying data sources are kept upon pressing roll forward. All you need to do is you need to push from your data sources the corresponding year of account data. So everything is going to be there, you just need to refresh it, which makes it so much faster when you are preparing your annual reports. Another great thing is that disclosure management provides you with a lot of monitoring reports. So you can track access to disclosure management. You can track activity and status for every chapter within your system. All these reports are displayed on screen via the web portal. You might be thinking, yes, another thing that we have as an issue is to make sure that our data matches. So, for example, is our balance sheet balancing in disclosure management? Once we have pulled all our data, we have done our manual changes and additional calculations, well, you can also include custom validations. It's a feature, again, available in disclosure management, which is going to indicate, based on Excel formulas, whether things are calculating and working as expected or not. And if they're not, of course, you can address the issue as part of the preparation process. Periods and reports. This is the fundamental basis of disclosure management. So we are looking at a screenshot from the system. So every set of financial statement is tied to a period. This period is something that you create yourself, or either directly or via the roll forward function. And you can call this period something meaningful, in the sense of course, year of account against which we are reporting, but is it the annual report, is it the quarterly report, or not? We also can see from a drop-down all of the reports that are associated with our corresponding period. We've seen already the structure, the hierarchy, which holds our statements and notes. And this is a detail of the chapter. So a very important principle in disclosure management, the top part, which in our case financial statements, this is what we call the report. Everything underneath the report is called a chapter. So we can see in here as information that we can either edit or view this chapter based on whether we want to review it or we want to do some work against it. We can see what's our current step, and we can see our chapter is in progress, the work is in progress. We also have a notification and indication of what our due date is. We see what our options as output, remember the output processor, and also who has made the last change to this chapter and when this change was made. Reports and periods, as I said, they're tied to each other. So from the navigation system on reports, you can filter based on a period. And this will show you all of the reports available for this particular period. You will have an indication of what's the workflow set here, what's the type of the workflow, and what type of reports we have. You notice here that we have a unit. So usually if you are preparing your group annual reports, but also your local entity reports, this will mean that we'll have various units, and chapters can be connected to specific unit, which will enable this filtering feature even further. Reports and chapters. What we see is what are the components of a report in terms of a setup. So we can set whether we want an email notification for this report. We can put a limit of how many revisions we can have to this chapter, because we may want to restrict it to a certain number. So this is the report setup. In here we see the same report and its corresponding chapters. I will come back to this later, because iXBRL reports are slightly different as opposed to Word reports or Excel reports, because here the chapter content is created automatically for you. Whereas if we're looking at a Word or an Excel report, we have to create the chapters ourselves. Let's say that you have been provided with your narrative from another department, if we're talking, let's say, about the local entities, and you don't want to retype all of this narrative in your disclosure management. You can upload it via an upload function which is available, and then just adjust the data so that it's dynamic and add any additional content that you want to add, or format this report itself. There is such a capability. This is applicable for Excel as well. Any chapter apart from the iXBRL reports can have an uploaded content in this via this function. Another one which I want to represent and show to you is that also you have a history of every single chapter that you have. So you can see here that chapter has been locked because you usually have a stop date after which no changes should be made to your annual statements. Upon this date, you have the ability in DM to lock your chapters and reports, and only unlock them if it's authorized by the corresponding super user for any last minute changes. Checked in would mean that we have added additional information, value, or anything new to this chapter, and this is being tracked as well. It also tracks the status of the workflow, so you can see that here we have started the work, we have finished, and now it is approved. So every step of the way is being tracked, which is great for auditing purposes. Data cache, or our data repository in disclosure management. Let's see what this comprises of. As we said, we pull data from multiple data sources into our data cache, which is effectively a workbook. However, it has an add-in to Excel, which enables us to perform a lot of activities on our data. These data can then be used across multiple chapters, Word chapters in disclosure management based on what we need to disclose in our financial statements, and it can be in different format. A graph, a table. Table is the most commonly used output that we use in Word document. And also we can have some key figures which are mentioned across our annual report, which are derived from the data that we have in the data cache, percentages or any specific amounts or values that we need to mention. So these individual numbers would also be linked to the data cache, and upon any change in the data cache, they will be refreshed automatically on the face of your Word report. Data sources, I just wanted to show you so you can see when you set up your disclosure management, you can point it to multiple data sources, and this is how it looks like. So you need to declare a name for your data source, and you can have a list of all your data sources here connected to the disclosure management server and use it accordingly. And of course, if your users belong to Active Directory or you can benefit from single sign-on, you can tick this button as well. Data caches. The most common output from a data cache onto a Word report is a table. So we are looking here at a balance sheet which has the node numbers and the data itself. The data itself, as we said, it can be derived from various data sources. It can be a formula or a calculation. So in our data cache, it's up to us to decide what we bring over to the Word report. We highlight it and we create a name range, and this is how we establish a data provider for our Word report. We call this in disclosure management world a BIP range. It's best practice as a naming convention to use that. It works as a standard way, the same way as the name ranges work in Excel. But you need to do that to be able to pull this table over into your Word report. What we are looking at now is a design example of how this could work. So we can have two data caches, and they can feed multiple Word chapters. So you can see the first data cache is feeding 2 chapters, 2 Word chapters. The second one is feeding 3. So the connection can be established based on your requirements and based on your needs. We need to, however, make sure that in order to be able to establish connection number 2, so from chapter 2 data cache, both of our Word reports should belong to the same period. They shouldn't belong to another period, because in that case it's not going to work. The data flow in disclosure management, that's just another representation of how the data flows. So we pull all of our data sources information into disclosure management, we organize it, we apply formatting, adjust rounding errors, add some custom validations, and then move this data over for presentation purposes into the corresponding output format that we want. This is all achieved via collaborative workflow, which we know already that we can set up based on our needs and our requirements and the team responsibilities. And then we can produce different outputs, and here are some examples in terms of iXBRL to different tax authorities which we need to comply with. Report types, that's something which you need to set up, and it's very easy. There are plugins for all of these extensions available when you download Disclosure Management, and you have the freedom to create any report type that you want. So it will have supported chapter content and then what could be the output of it. So if we look as an example here, we have a Word report which we can use to generate another Word format in a PDF format or HTML. Here is a representation of available report types. Formatting. Disclosure Management gives you the flexibility to decide what you want to do with formatting. Do you want to apply your formatting in Excel, or do you want to apply it in Word? If you apply your formatting in Excel or in your data cache, it will mean that whatever you see in your data cache is going to be displayed in the Word chapter. Colors, indentation, format of the figures, etc. So it is a like for like. The thing to consider in this case scenario is that every single table will have to be formatted by yourself or your team against each corresponding data cache to enable us to see all of this format coming over. So it can be a bit time consuming, but once you've set it up, then as we said, upon roll forward functionality, the format stays and it is how you would want it to be. Another option, which you may think that it's more dynamic, is to use the formatting in Word. This is a Word formatting template, a file where you can define the format of all your tables in advance. And then dynamically apply any table format to your corresponding table in the data cache. What is great about this is that it's centrally managed, so if a change is required, you can update the change in one place, and it's going to reflect across all tables affected. The only thing to consider here is that you know that some of your notes and some of your tables can have many columns, various number of columns and sizes. So this means that you have to create a table in advance for every single type of table based on rows and columns. Rounding management. I mentioned already that disclosure management can help you with your rounding issues, and how this is done is by an additional feature that disclosure management offers. So this is something that again is designed at the start of the project. You can apply a consolidation level to your hierarchy. This will depend on how ready your data is for the annual report. You can apply some controls and some rules which will flag if there is a problem with rounding, so that you can address it. And this rounding management feature would be existing against every single data cache for every single table that you are reporting against. Something again which I said, you set it up at the beginning and then you reuse it for the upcoming years. So you can call your rounding management issues, you can tell them goodbye. Custom validations. We are preparing for, annual financial statements, or quarterly or monthly. It doesn't really matter. They're all important, and we always need to ensure that the data that we are disclosing is correct and it is efficient and up to the best quality standard. So as another step, what you can design in disclosure management is some custom validation rules to your data. They're Excel-based formulas, and they're available in your data cache, but they'll also be displayed on the chapter screen, where we can see what's the due date, what state we're at the workflow. So if a chapter or a table has failed the custom validations, there will be a flag against the information screen of our chapter, and we will know that we have to go in to this chapter and make sure that everything is fixed and correct. Security and audit. Security, it's designed in a certain way in disclosure management. So we have our users and we have roles. So our roles are designed again by ourselves based on our needs of so how many type of users we need and who has a certain permissions. The permissions are split into two in disclosure management. So we have local permissions and global permissions. Global permissions are across the board, so they are specific to an entity. If you remember, we said that for a group we'll have one entity or unit in disclosure management, and then we'll have for every local entity another entity in disclosure management itself. So in here you can assign a specific user to edit role, for example, to our group entity. This would mean that this user has access to all of the reports and chapters associated with this entity, regardless of the period or the year of account against which we are reporting. However, there are cases that, for example, some of the local entities or one of the local entities reports is information that needs to feed into the group accounts. But you wouldn't want the person responsible for the local statutory preparation to access the group accounts. So what you can do is you can narrow down the access of this user, and the way you will be able to do it is via local permissions. So in these local permissions, you will be able to assign this person to a particular period and to a particular chapter within the report. So this would mean that they will only have access to what they should have access and nothing else. So you can design a very complex matrix here in terms of access if you need to. The access also can be tied to the workflow itself. What we see here is a standard workflow. This comes out of the box with disclosure management. We see that we have one approval and one rejection step, but as I said, you can add as many as you want. And create your custom workflow. So we see the steps associated with this workflow and the corresponding icon. If you remember at the beginning of the webinar, we saw these icons which show us at what step of the workflow we are at for a particular chapter. We have the next step, and this is the design of the workflow that we have in place. For every step in your workflow, you can assign permissions, and you can tie these permissions to the different roles that you have created. And on the basis of what role a user has, they won't be able to, let's say, approve or reject unless you have assigned them to do so. Data sources to disclosures. So that's another view of how the data flows. So multiple sources. We have our user interface is Excel via add-in which disclosure management has. We do validations, we check our data and make sure that it is ready to move on to the next step. Then we check if there is additional data entry. So for example, most of the data source systems don't provide the earnings per share figure. So this is something that you would want to add as a calculation in disclosure management. And you can do that. And via the workflow and the steps provided across the process that we have, you come closer to having a final data cache which you can use in your report. We said security and audit. From audit perspective, there is a lot of information that you can obtain from disclosure management. How can you do that? We have a specific special monitoring tab in disclosure management, and this is an extract from that. And you can see all of the information that you can pull out. And these are on-demand reports which you can generate at any point in time. As an example, I'm showing here an access report or monitoring, and here you can see what type of permissions these users have and what they can perform as an activity on the chapter level, on report level, and when it comes to configuration. So at any point in time you can be informed of what's happening on the system. You have a revision monitor as well, which will show you all of the revisions associated with a particular chapter or report, with any commentary assigned to it or any additional information that you need. iXBRL and XBRL. So iXBRL is extensive business reporting language which is used worldwide, and you can see how many countries are using this format to submit their financial information to corresponding authorities. Inline extensive business reporting language is iXBRL. The difference between the two is the following. iXBRL is something that has been out there for quite a long time, and it is a machine-readable report which is generated by the authorities' software to check and ensure the data that is being disclosed it matches, it's correct, it's sensible, and it is corresponding to the auditor's sign-off. It is efficient because you have everything in one place, into one big file for a corresponding entity or company. And it has been called for a while the barcodes for reporting. iXBRL is something that is more recent, and you can see that these are the 4 countries at the moment which are using this format to submit to authorities. The difference is that it's all not only machine readable like iXBRL is, but it's also human readable and structured. This helps when you are doing checks and when you're reviewing the annual reports, and it's much easier to use because you have 2 options, human and machine readable. What it is HTML standard file, but you have an additional tags that are embedded into this file for a more efficient review of the data that you have. Just a little bit of representation of how this looks like from design perspective in disclosure management. You need to have for each entity that you are preparing, either iXBRL or XBRL, you need to have 4 reports. 3 of these reports are specific to your entity, and the 4th report is generic. for all of your entities. The taxonomy report is a place where you would upload your taxonomies. Now, these taxonomies can be base taxonomies, for example, in the context of IFRS, which are downloaded and available online and need to be uploaded into DM. In the concept of US SEC, you have base taxonomies and extended taxonomies, or also you can have extended taxonomies not because of the regulatory body, but because you are operating in a specific industry. The taxonomy report is connected to the iXBRL report, which you need to configure based on currency, period against which you are reporting, entity code in your registered entity code in the corresponding country, etc. And then the other two connections are with the data cache and the Word template. So every entity will have a data cache, a Word, and an iXBRL report, and they are all linked together. You can perform tagging, which is to prepare the iXBRL report, in the data cache and in Word. Usually, data cache is used for the so-called hidden tags. So, for example, if you are tagging the status of a director who has signed the financial accounts, is the company dormant or not, what's the country of incorporation, etc. The visible tagging is usually done in Word, and these are things like start of the period for the report, end period for the report, etc. So once we have set all of these things, so we have our data ready, we have formatted it, we have tagged the data, we can then create our either iXBRL or XBRL report. The output is in an HTML format and in an XML format, which then is something that we pass on for filing and submission to the corresponding tax authority. Just another view in terms of taxonomies. This is how the taxonomies would look like. The example is FRS 101. This is an extract from your Excel add-in in disclosure management. So you have all of the taxonomies associated with this reporting standard, and then you have different tabs against which you navigate to assign every single line that you need to tag. And from one regulatory to another, the requirements for tagging vary. Some have minimum requirements, whereas others have you have to tag everything, the full scope of annual report. So this brings us to a little navigation through disclosure management, because I would like you to see how the system looks like in front of your eyes. So we have period and we have reports from the drop down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter a data cache so that we can see what features we have available and how we can actually create our tables, which will bring them over into Word. So what we see here is income statement with several tabs. So these tabs, you can see the data is raw. It comes from a BEX query coming from BW, and I'm using this number, linking it here for my turnover for 2017. The rest of the data can be coming from multiple data sources or from this spreadsheet itself. It doesn't really matter how many combinations you do, whether your data source is one or multiple data sources, you consolidate them in here. This is the raw data, and here I have applied some formatting in my Excel spreadsheet, just because I've decided that I want to use Excel formatting when I bring it over to Word. If I highlight it, you will see that I have my BIP range created and ready. In here, just to show you, the add-in for disclosure management has multiple buttons that we can use here. One of the most common one is apply changes, because for any change that you make, and let me show you, you need to apply changes for this to be saved to the server. So you don't save it locally, you use apply changes, and this will save it on the server. And you can add commentary, additional information added, and you can close it, keep it in edit mode or just in view mode. This is now going to close my data cache. And I want to show you this comparison between two revisions of this document, of this chapter. So in the revision screen, you can see how many revisions you have for this particular chapter. When you highlight a revision, it always compares it to the latest one. So you have the ability to show changes. And it flags here that this has been changed, test. This is the latest thing that changed from between one and another. The last thing I'm going to show you before we get into the Q&A session is this table, how it is brought over into the Word report. So income statement, we have our hierarchy. And if I go into edit mode, you see, this is my table, and you can see that it's an object corresponding to the data cache. It's not a hard-coded table by looking at objects. So you see it comes from this period, data cache report primaries. The data provider is the name range which I gave it. And you can see where all this information comes from and when it was last created and by who. There is much more content which I can show you in disclosure management, but I would like to give the opportunity for you to ask questions. So let's have a look what questions we've got. Okay, I can see a question here. Our underlying data source comes from BPC, and because that is the case, we're interested to know how this dynamic connection of the data happens. When it comes to BPC, you have your EPM add-in, and you have your disclosure management add-in on the top of your Excel workbook. So what you need to do is you need to log on via your EPM add-in to your BPC system, pull the report. It can be either a report that has already been created in the format that you need, or it can be a massive data load from your BPC system, and then by applying changes in disclosure management, it's going to save this against your data cache. Then when you want to change the year of account, you would have to go into your EPM add-in, change the year of account against your report, and this will automatically refresh the data in your disclosure management interface as well. Okay, another question. The person asking states that they're using BFC, so Business Financial Consolidation, for their financial data, and they're interested to know as well how they can bring the data over. With FC, it is slightly different as opposed to BPC. So in FC, you have the benefit of having direct push, automatic push via bundle that will load the data into disclosure management automatically. So there is no no pull or a refresh of EPM report or anything like that. It can just be pushed automatically from FC into disclosure management. Also, what is great is that upon every push of this report bundle, you get commentary and a status update that this data came from the FC system. Let's see if there are any other questions. From experience with existing clients, which is the preferred option for formatting? Well, I have worked on different implementations, and it's always based on the customer's preference. But I think the most common one that I've seen is the Word formatting, because it is centralized. It can be aligned with the publishers. So it's something that you can do and be aligned with the publishing company once you deliver the annual report to them. I don't see any further questions, so I would like to thank you for your participation in this webinar. I hope it was helpful and it gave you some useful insights. And if you don't have disclosure management yet, hopefully after you have seen its capabilities, you would be now interested to implement it and use it. If you have any other questions, you can contact me. Please feel free to send me an email, and I will respond to your questions and comments. Thank you very much, and have a lovely day.